Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with New York jazz pianist and composer Chris Pattishall. He opened up about his latest 2021 CD, The Zodiac Suite. This debut album channels the legendary Mary Lou Williams' futuristic early jazz compositions. Everything for him began in Durham, North Carolina, and jazz would become his fascination. He always dreamed of making his way to New York and doing what he does now. It's a great story. Enjoy.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Chris, for taking a minute out for Neon Jazz. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's go ahead and start off with your latest release. And before we kind of get into Mary Lou Williams and kind of for the etymology of your jazz history, which you love, and you love Mary Lou, let's kind of talk a little bit about, when I started doing interviews back when the pandemic started, it was like, what a bummer that you released an album but you can't do it live. And as we've migrated into 2021, it almost seems like having an album coming out now is almost like a series of live gigs that you're giving people.
Right. Yeah.
What are your feelings on this coming out during this very strange time, and any ambivalence or any thoughts on the timing of this?
To be honest, I think I've made peace with it in a way. Obviously, it feels like the industry is at a standstill because obviously live performance is still at a standstill. The reality is, okay, this just means I don't have to worry about booking a tour. I don't have to worry about landing an anchor gig so that I can subsidize all the other one-off, like little jazz club gigs that I'm not going to make any money on, or, you know what I mean? It's like this actually, in a way, just removes this whole stress from the equation and allows me to focus the time and the energy and whatever potential money I might be hanging on to into something else. And in my case, there's like visual media that I'm very interested in, that I'm having this artist Kim Alpert design. Ultimately, for a live context, it will exist as sort of a video projection, but in the interim, we're focused on getting a bunch of really interesting looking stuff that will kind of just put people in a vibe as they listen to the music. There's another piece of it too, which is just also that I think personally, for me, I've come to a place where I look at it and I say, let me just be grateful that I have something that I can look forward to, something that I can be excited about. This is music that I love. I love this music so deeply, and I have chosen to share this, and I think that the music deserves to be heard in any time, and in a way maybe even more in a time like now when people need things to lift them up. But at least even if no one else likes it, at least for me, it's like a thing that I can look back on in this time and say, well, there was a lot of hardship, there was a lot of difficulty, but I got to release this thing that I love, and I got to do it in a way that frankly I really loved, and I stand by it,
The thing that I find interesting when I read through the notes of your life and this album is Mary Lou Williams comes up, and I don't know that I understood the power of her until I really got into doing this show back in 2011. I really started digging in. I mean, just like the history of jazz that she did, everything that she did. She has underpinnings to Kansas City, and there's so many things. Just talk to me a little bit about kind of the aura and the power that she has exuded over your knowledge and reach and talent in jazz.
Yeah, so I mean, Mary Lou, I knew about her from a very early stage because I grew up in Durham, and she spent the last several years of her life as artist in residence at Duke University. So there was a building named after her. She was the sort of godhead of the sort of jazz department there, and I knew something about that. And my dad had some records of her, some like Pablo discs that she did in the 70s. It's just her and Buster Williams, and I listened to them. But it was not until really later, when I first was moving to New York, I started to kind of listen to the Zodiac Suite again, or started to listen to it for the first time. I heard a version of Cancer by someone else that was on WVGO, and when they announced that it was Cancer from the Zodiac Suite, I said, okay, I really got to go back and check this now. And that led very quickly to just sort of diving into her music, but really through this entry point. And then that led to just a much fuller investigation of her life, her other works, all of the recordings, the sacred music, and the other total legacy of Mary Lou is like that of just sort of nurturer, educator, someone who took care of so many people who were in need, even when she was absolutely, basically destitute. She still was there caring for people. She took care of sick jazz musicians who were, suffering with addiction. She really just a saint, And the more I've investigated that piece of it, the deeper it becomes, I actually want to tell you a crazy story. Recently, my girlfriend and I, we were looking at apartments in New York because one of the upsides of the time is that rents are lower, and she found this place on Hamilton Terrace, which is this short little street in Harlem, and it only goes for like a block or two. And I was like, oh my God, Mary Lou Williams, her apartment was in a building at the end of that little street. It's at 63 Hamilton Terrace or 64. Now I forget. But it's right there. I know that building. I used to go and walk by it all the time. I lived close by there. It was in the building. And so I was like, okay, well, we have to go see the apartment. We got to go at least see it. It wasn't on the floor that hers was on. It ended up not being the thing that we were in the vibe for, but it's like, for me, there's also pieces of it where it's like, man, I walk around the neighborhood and I know both when I'm in New York, which is my now home, and when I'm in Durham, which is my birthplace, childhood home, it's like I know in both of those places that she walked here and she walked there and she went to this place and she lived over there on, I think it was Shepherd Street in Durham. Like I know at some point I have the address, it's like, so she's not just it's not just an abstract thing for me.
Yeah, man, it's funny how life works. Yeah, totally. I get it. I mean, being in Kansas City, when I'm down on 18 and Vine, and I really start kind of preening into the history of what happened down there, I mean, you can just almost feel the ghosts bumping into each other. It's a trip for sure. So coming out of North Carolina, talk to me a little bit about how you got this jazz pixie dust sprinkled over your world. This is what you became.
At some point, my parents hooked me up with a piano, kind of an early piano teacher, who rather than teaching me just like, the whatever beginning piano book, they were teaching me these little 12-bar blues, kind of notated, very simple little boogie-woogie blues things. And so when I got to middle school, there was the band director and the chorus director at the school were both jazz musicians. The band director is a guy named Stanley Barrett. The chorus director is a guy named Chip Crawford, who neither of them are at that school. Chip has lived in New York for a long time since then and is Gregory Porter's pianist for a long time. And Stanley is an amazing musician and teacher in North Carolina. And Stanley kind of saw me, and I had some class that was essentially a free period that coincided with Chip's free period. And so from 10, 11, 12, Stanley, every time I was in that class, he would just be like, oh yeah, go over to Chip, go work on this, go work on that, whatever. And so from a very early age, I was like exposed to the music in a real direct way. And then also Chip started introducing me to other musicians. So I was meeting people in college and people, the elders in the scene in that part of North Carolina. And so I felt this incredible community. I felt invited into this community. Everyone in the community kind of recognized me. Everybody was like, oh yeah, it's Baby Chris. Like, what's up, Baby Chris? And that was a very powerful feeling. And then I also heard Monk, and, probably around 11 or 12, it's Monk at Newport, and in the 60s, and it just totally, it was like, man, he's playing, I can hear that he's playing the same notes in my simple little blues thing that I learned, but it sounds completely different. And there's something about the piano, it's like, it sounds broken somehow, but he's doing it on command. It's like, I don't understand it. And I think those two factors kind of together cemented it for me. And by the time I was 12, 13, I was like, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to be a jazz pianist. I'm going to move to New York City. I'm going to live not just the life of the music, but the life of the community. I want to be a part of this community. I want to know all of these people, and I want to hear them and be there with them, you know?
Yeah, totally. What was the first live jazz show that you saw that really blew your doors down, that kind of solidified everything for you?
I mean, I heard a lot of live music when I was kind of coming up. I got to meet Donald Byrd before he passed. I got to play with him. There's some pictures somewhere. I'm like probably 11 or something, and I think we played Cantaloupe Island or something like that. Meeting him was amazing. I don't really remember the music as much. I heard Jimmy Heath very early on. That definitely did something for me. There was some other. Who did I hear? I went and saw Danilo Perez at some point when I was very young, and that did something. And I think he was probably doing the Panamonk project at that time. But a lot of it for me was my teachers. I mean, Chip Crawford has got some of the most insane concepts in terms of how his hands relate to each other and what is going on at some moments. And there is a thing that I definitely got from him that is with me to this day. And I would just watch him play, you know, I mean, hearing him play with different local musicians who also for me were like, they were people I was revering, you know.
What do you miss the most about that old world that we have left from last March? What is it about, whether it's the stage or whatever it is, what are you missing the most that you really want to get back to whenever things kind of slow down and we get back to life?
I would say that there is just nothing. There's nothing in our current world that can really quite replicate what it is like to have a group of musicians playing on a stage with an audience that is there. And it's not just the musicians. Like, the whole thing about it that I think musicians don't always do the best job of acknowledging is that, like, it's a circuit, you know, and you can't have, like, you need the energy of the audience. It's a shared space that we're all entering into together. And when it really comes together and it really works, it's the most unbelievable feeling, you know. So there's a piece of it that's just playing music with other musicians and friends that I love and admire, and getting to do that on a regular basis. Like, I'm going to just be so grateful for, you know, it's going to be great in that sense. But it's also got to have the audience, because you can't, it's not just, the music has never been just for the musicians, you know. That's not the way it works.
Why do you love jazz? Just very simply put, why do you love jazz?
Whew. Okay. Simply put, I love jazz because in its best moments, it involves the most magical, intuitive, acrobatic, and sort of transcendent coordination and listening and sort of openness of heart and spirit, and, you know, for it to really happen at the best levels when all of the musicians are kind of synced up like that. That to me is, I think, probably my favorite part of jazz, of what we call jazz.
One more kind of level of this world, and going into the next one, what I hope is a revival, and I'm sure it will be, when we do all return to the audience and you return to the stage, what do you hope we collectively realize about this long absence from live music?
I think there are, like, in ways, different categories of that, you know. I can speak from the musician side. I can say that I personally, and almost the majority of the musicians that I know that are in the scene, working, hustling, trying to pay rent, doing stuff like that, we have definitely allowed at times a kind of disengagement, if not outright bitterness about having, sometimes you take a gig because you're like, well, I got to pay my rent or I got to do this or whatever. And I think it's a real fortunate state that we had allowed ourselves to get into, because it really just distracts from playing the music and just remembering that we love the music, and it's just another layer that prevents us from getting to that sort of state that I'm saying is like the best one, And so I hope that as musicians, as we re-enter as we start to have enough work where there's even an opportunity for that kind of feeling to re-emerge, I hope that we are able to hold on to some sense of gratitude at just the act of being able to make music, and just kind of seeing the bigger picture in a way. I don't know if I want to speak too much for the audience, because I imagine that everyone involved, there will, at least initially, there will be a kind of euphoric gratitude that we're just able to do this again. It'll probably it'll be tempered against probably a deep anxiety that many people will feel about sort of re-entering social spaces, and it probably will not be without some strain along the way. But at some point there will be something of a kind of consistent live performance again, and I hope in those moments, I guess, just that all of us are able to just enjoy the fact that we're able to do it again,
Yeah, I agree. Let's say you have a dream tonight. You run into your younger self, like right around the time you were getting ready to start doing your professional gigs, and you could give your younger self one piece of advice. What would it be?
I think if it was only one piece of advice, I think it would be essentially to trust my instincts, to hopefully feel a little bit of calm in that, and some confidence in my instincts. I think when you're young, at least for me, when I got to New York, it was another level of intensity than what I sort of was used to. And I think especially for an artist early in a career, there are temptations, It's like, well, there are a bunch of gigs over here. There's some stuff over there, and there's sort of like XYZ pre-requirements of the gig, and if you want to kind of shift your whole direction one way or another, there's opportunity there, and that can be very distracting and very anxiety producing for someone who doesn't necessarily want to go any of those routes. And so I think I would have just tried to basically be like, you got this, just trust your instincts. You're going to be cool.
Final question. Everyone has a perception of who they think you are, your family, your friends, your fans. You're living your life. Who do you think you are?
I think that I'm a person who, primarily using music, but using the arts in general, seeks to, conduct some empathy, generate some sort of space that ultimately, can have some sort of healing resonance, but also that explores the world through the way that I see it, which is like very much liking to look through kaleidoscopes and mirrors and optical illusions and kind of twisting things in some surreal ways, but always with a certain kind of warmth and empathy at the center of it.
That's wonderful, man. That's a great answer. Chris, thank you for taking a minute to talk about your life and jazz, the new album, Mary Lou, and all of it in between. Good luck with the album and the return to the stage.
Absolutely, Joe. Thank you so much. It really has been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in North Carolina, New York, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. Thanks to Chris for his time, music, and story. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.